Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Welcome, my friends, to another exciting Chat with the Author episode of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Every month in the book club, we deep dive into books that have been recommended by previous guests on the podcast. And I love these episodes because we are sitting down with the experts. This week's book and guest have been recommended 3 different times on the podcast, and the book has a foreword from Dave Ramsey himself. That gets my attention. So I grabbed a copy of the book and I reached out to the author to schedule this episode. The book is Thou Shalt Prosper, 10 Commandments for Making Money, and the author is Rabbi Daniel Lapin. But before I introduce Rabbi Lapin, let me give you a brief background. Known widely as America's rabbi, he is a noted rabbinic scholar, best-selling author, and TV host. He studied in England as well as Israel and established a boat-building business in Johannesburg, South Africa, before immigrating to the U.S. and founding the Pacific Jewish Center in California. In addition to writing the best-selling book Thou Shalt Prosper, which is actually his 3rd book, he is a frequent speaker for hundreds of organizations, including keynoting the Congressional Bi-Partisan opening of the 106th Congress in Washington, D.C. His articles have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, National Review, the Jewish Press, and the Washington Times. Rabbi Lapin, welcome to the Modern Leadership Podcast. How are you today?
Couldn't be better, thank you, Jake. So delighted to be with you.
Well, it is great to get you on the podcast because I have a ton of questions about your terrific book, Thou Shalt Prosper. But before I ask you anything about that, how in the world do you get it all done? You have so much going on.
Scheduling, meticulous scheduling, and a very clearly articulated and well-pronounced word called N-O.
Mastering the art of no.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In other words, knowing what you really want to accomplish means a whole lot of other things you won't accomplish. This is just like spending money, right? Money and time. You spend money, and if you decide what you want to buy, that decision contains within it implicitly the decision of the things you're not going to buy. And the use of your time is exactly the same thing. And it's really terribly difficult. It took me quite a while to master that discipline of simply being able to say no. Now, sometimes you can say, I'm sorry, but no, or I have to apologize, but no. But the bottom line is that you have to decline a lot of things, including a lot of things you really, really want to do. But it's a question of deciding business priorities. So there it is.
And I think that's a leadership principle. And one of the things that I do now, of course, I struggle with this like many leaders do. But one of the things that helps me to kind of get over the hump is remembering that every time you say yes to something, you are automatically saying no to something else.
That's exactly right. That's the corollary to what we just discussed. That's right. You buy this. Well, now you're not going to be able to buy that because you have a budget and you have a time budget as well.
Well, I want to dive into this terrific book, Thou Shalt Prosper. And one of the lines from your bio says that you have the ability to extract practical life principles from the Bible and transmit them in life-changing and captivating manner that brings thousands of Jews and Christians closer to their respective faiths. And so I want to start out by talking about how these principles, the 10 commandments that we're talking about in this book, Thou Shalt Prosper, how they relate to all of us and not just in your profession as a rabbi or in your calling as a rabbi, but to all of us, both Jews and Christians.
Yeah. So I haven't practiced as a rabbi since 92, when I retired at a very young age from the synagogue that I had established in California. And I retired from that partially because my wife and I wanted to move to an island in the Pacific Northwest where we wanted to homeschool the children for a few years, and also because I wanted to start doing this work on business and finance. So what the basis of it is very simple. As I like to point out, you'd have to be a blind immigrant, legal immigrant from outer Mongolia, not to know a very simple truth. And that is that the people of Israel, the Jewish people, are disproportionately good with money. You know, the population of Jews in America, for instance, is under 2%. And that means that each year when Forbes magazine publishes the annual list of 400 richest Americans, there should be about 6 or 7 Jews on that list. The problem is that there's never fewer than 60, and it's usually about 100, which is a massive overrepresentation. This is repeated not only in America, but in every country, hospitable and wonderful countries around the world, as well as repressive and tyrannical regimes. In all of these places, Jews have disproportionately prospered. It's not just in the 21st century, but it's been in every century. And so the only logical explanation for this quite an arguable phenomenon is that number one, Jews are smarter than other people. Well, the problem with that theory is that, number one, that is simply not true. Today, measured on IQ and university performance and SAT performance and graduate school performance, Asians outperform Jews. That wasn't true 50 years ago, but it is true today. Number two, it's also very interesting to note that IQ is not only, very high IQ is not only not an asset in making money, it's actually a detriment. And what I point out is that if you have a look at the bell curve of intelligence, way down at the bottom end, at the really low non-functional end, the sort of Forrest Gump area, people do not make money. Forrest Gump, we must remember, was a movie, not real life. And at the other end of the bell curve, where we're up in the rarefied zone occupied by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, you don't make money either. Now, they're always outliers, and I mentioned 2 of them right now. But overwhelmingly, the people who make money are the people who occupy that big fat bulge right in the middle. Just ordinary folks like you and me and like all our other friends. That's where it is. Too much intelligence, too smart, and you get the origin of the expression "too smart for your own good."
Yeah, and I think this is empowering for us, right? Because most of the listeners to the podcast are sitting right in the big fat bell part of the curve there.
Sure, we all are. If we were down at the bottom end, we wouldn't, we'd be non-functional. We wouldn't know how to be on a podcast. And if we're over at that extreme top end, we'd feel that we're too smart to learn anything from anybody else. So the explanation for why Jews are disproportionately good with money does not lie with intelligence. Neither does it lie with a really stupid explanation, which I've heard many, many times, and I had to debunk it in my work, is that Jews, you see, what happened was all the poor Jews got killed by Cossacks and by Polish hoodlums, and that left the rich ones free to reproduce because they were able to buy their way to freedom. The problem with that is there'd have to be some kind of money gene in Jewish sperm. And of course, medical research has not revealed the existence of such a thing. So that is complete nonsense. And if it wasn't nonsense, we'd see that great fortunes would last forever. And in fact, they don't. We find that families build up great wealth, and then you eventually come to usually the third generation that become wastrels and dissipated. It has nothing to do with genetics.
That's where that saying comes from that is, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations or clogs to clogs.
So if it was genetic, we wouldn't have that. And so if Jews' success is not genetic and it is not intelligence, then what is it? And the answer, after many, many years of research, and I might add that it's research that only could have been done by a Jewish rabbi, because if anybody else would have embarked on this on this program, on this research project, they would have been instantly identified as an anti-Semitic bigot, because Jews hate the idea of people acknowledging that they're good with money. By the way, one other theory is, and I've heard this one told to me as well, is that Jews rip people off. That's why in the Oxford English Dictionary, the word Jew also appears as a verb, as in to Jew somebody. And And this one was actually quite an interesting one to debunk. I ended up interviewing more than 300 non-Jewish business professionals who during their career have had extensive, lengthy business relationships with Jews. And what I was able to verify is exactly what you'd suspect, which is, yes, there are some bad apples among Jews, just as there are among Baptists or atheists or Scientologists or anyone else. But overwhelmingly, you do not thrive or prosper consistently with a bad reputation because you simply just run out of people who do business with you. And so no, on the contrary, most of the people I spoke to, the overwhelming majority who'd had lengthy experiences during their business careers with Jews spoke warmly and fondly. And there were some very, very touching stories I encountered, some of which appear in my book.
And your book is quite a lengthy book. I was very surprised when I picked it up that as I got into it, I'm thinking 10 commandments, maybe we have 10, 15 pages of commandment and we're going to get, 100 and 150 page book.
Well, it's like imagine Usain Bolt, who won the 100 meter in the London Olympics, were to write a book on how to win the 100 meter. And it was a one-page book. Move your legs quicker, Well, thanks, but it doesn't really help. I wanted to make sure that I was delivering a book that actually would work and that would show people that what makes for Jewish financial success over the year is not anything related specifically to being Jewish. For instance, it's not about being circumcised because if it was, I think many people would prefer poverty. So it's not that at all. It's a vast collection of tips and tools and techniques derived from the Bible. Now, you've heard of Jews being called the people of the book, right?
Yes.
Well, it's not the Manhattan Telephone Directory. The book is the Bible. That's what it means. And it turns out that there are certain attitude and idea as well as a strategy that are embedded within the Hebrew text of the Bible known as the Tanakh. And this is something that typically Jews have imbibed with their mother's milk. It's conversations around the dinner table, and it's education, it's going to school, and these things become second nature. And I wanted to deliver to my reader a book that would impart all of that to people of whatever religious background or no religious background at all, so that everybody could absorb that.
And I think that's what stood out to me the most as I read this book. And that is if I was to go up and ask you, Rabbi Lapin, what the secrets to wealth, and by the way, you're quick to point out that this isn't a book about becoming rich. It's a book about adding value. It's about becoming your best self and using some of these things that you learn. If I were to ask you what these secrets are, you, after a lifetime of studying them, could distill them down to me. But the typical Jew that I would approach and request this information from wouldn't be able to identify them, because to them, it was a way of life that they got from birth all the way through their experiences of education, through their religious study, and on through. It was the little stories that their father taught them in the home. And that is where they learned and brought this not just as a learning, but as a way of life.
Jake, it's a very astute observation you've just made. Nobody's ever picked up on that before, but I think you're exactly right, which is that anybody who does, go to a terrific dancer and say, how do you do it? I don't think most dancers can tell you how they do it. It's just in them. Great musicians, how do you write tunes like that? Well, I just do. It's in, Michelangelo was asked, if I have this correctly, but if not, it's a great story anyway. How do you produce statues? And he said, it's easy. The statue's just sitting there in the block of marble. All I got to do is chip away the waste, which doesn't help me at all. And so, yes, that's one of the reasons this work took so many years and so much work to actually achieve.
Well, let's jump into it here for just a a minute. Now, like I mentioned in the pre-interview, we're going to be talking about this book for the next couple of weeks on the podcast. So we don't have to unpack the whole book now. And besides, we want people to go out and buy the book and read the book. But let's talk about just a couple. And I wanted to see if you had one of the 10 commandments that resonated with you the most, or one that you think as a starting point or a foundational point for us. And then I'll share with you one that jumped out to me. How about that?
Sure. Well, particularly at this particular point in time, and because I'd like our interview to be an evergreen, I'm not going to mention the date when we're talking about it, but I will just say this, that we're living in a time in the United States of America where there is a cultural war on wealth. What I mean by that is that there are certain expressions that are so common today from politicians and from others that if I were to just say the first part of the expression, most people can complete them. For instance, the rich must pay their fair share. Okay. How do you define the rich? Nobody bothers. Politicians don't want to define the rich because tomorrow it will be you. Politicians do not want to define what fair represents. How much, tell me how much you want me to pay. But whatever it is, this is designed to make everyone else, take their money because they're bad guys, because the fact that they've got money is evidence of their malfeasance. So that's one. Or how about the expression, have you heard where somebody gives a charitable gift, and I almost always hear a commentator saying, oh, it's so nice to see them giving back to society.
Yeah.
So that means when a wealthy philanthropist gives charity, he's giving back to society. Well, you understand that means that while he was making the money in the first place, he must have been ripping it off from society. And one thing after another, you get these notions. I'll tell you where else. Entertainment. Who commits the majority of violent crime in popular entertainment? I'll tell you one thing. It's not the people who commit the majority of violent crime in the United States of America. The people who do it on television and on movies, the villains, the real bad guys and villains are rich white men, almost without exception. Going back to the James Bond movies, the villains, that's always, in other words, the culture, people have been conditioned to believe that rich is evil, synonymous. Now, why is this a problem? Well, it's a problem because of a very fundamental principle that I teach, which is nobody can truly succeed at any enterprise that deep down in his heart he considers to be morally reprehensible. And so once you have been indoctrinated to believe that making money is somehow greedy and it's bad, it makes it very hard for you to do it properly yourself.
The commandment you're talking about here is the very first one. Believe in the dignity and morality of business.
Exactly right.
I love the story that you tell in the book where you say, okay, let's say that you believe what we're talking about here. Let's say that you believe that there is this war on the morality of business and that I really want to overcome it. I want to bypass it. I believe in the dignity of morality of business. How do I put it into action? And I love the story you tell about the medical sales rep and her recognizing her purpose. And I hope I teed you up there, but do you mind sharing that story of the medical sales rep and her monthly commission check and how that relates to the dignity and morality of business?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stories and a lot of accounts that have to do with this, and yes, I'll tell you about that. But you see, the problem is that in the same way that in May 1953, Edmund Hillary climbed Everest for the first time. Now, I mean, since then, nearly 1,000 people have climbed Everest. And the question is and I'm not saying it's easy, but I mean, it's obviously not impossible. So how come it was such a big deal when he did it? Why did nobody else do it before? And the answer is just like the 4-minute mile that Roger Bannister broke in 1954. Why, today every college athlete does a 4-minute mile. Why didn't anyone do it before? And the answer is the same in both cases. Nobody believed that it could be done. And when you don't believe something could be done, you simply are handicapped terribly and fatally from doing it. And so when you don't believe that making money can be done morally, then you're not going to be able to do it because our desire to see ourselves as upright, decent human beings is paramount and profound. And so the overwhelming majority of people today believe that making money is a function of greed. I profoundly dislike it when college graduates are told at commencement day ceremonies, there's always somebody who comes along with a speech and says how, it's wonderful, you should think of going into government, and that way you can serve people and you can really do good. No, don't do that. If you go into government, there's just another 10 fingers in my wallet. I don't want you to go into government. There's enough people in government. I want you to go into business and make jobs for people and find ways to improve my life by providing me with goods and services that I never even knew about. Don't go into government. Go into business. But everybody's been conditioned, indoctrinated to believe that if you want to go into business and make money, you're a greedy person. So one of these foundational things, and again, you speak about that pharmacy rep. She was very handicapped until she realized, and we were able to help her see the extent to which she was serving God's other children. And that's really what making money is all about.
Once you get your mind in the right place, once you've figured it out in your mind, like you said with that 4-minute mile, once you break down that barrier, well, then there's nothing stopping you from being successful at this point. You've taken down the one obstacle that you had to get over.
Yes, although I would just say it's not that simple. It's not just okay, I get it, I'm ready. No, they're exercises I walk you through, and it's not that simple. Changing a mindset is almost as hard as changing a bad habit. Don't underestimate the difficulty and the formidable challenge it presents.
Well, if all you had to do was overcome the belief and dignity of morality of business, then you would only have the one commandment of thou shalt prosper. You wouldn't have 10. Now, if I can, I'd like to share with you the one that jumped out to me.
I'd love to. I'd be fascinated.
Well, it's the fourth commandment, the do not pursue perfection. And I think that's because I've often been a perfectionist, often tried to find perfection in my life. But there's one story you tell in there that really resonated with me. And it talks about and forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, the havdala service.
That's right, yes. No, you pronounce it exactly right.
And a quick glance at reality reveals that business creates wealth. It doesn't redistribute it. And then you go into this story of this service. And I would love to have you tell it for the listeners here, because this really made sense to me.
Okay, so I mean, the idea in a nutshell there is simply that the cycle of the week is very, very foundational. And why it is that, contrary to all logic, and I don't want to take too much time right now on this, but contrary to all logic, because there's 365 days in a year, the correct number of days in a week should be 5. And that way, it comes December 31st, you just take a wet rag and wipe off your calendar, and it's good to go the next year. But the way things are with a 7-day week, 7 goes into 365 with a remainder. And so with the result of that, the problem is that the 22nd of March in 2017 turns out to be a Wednesday, but next year in 2018, it'll be a Thursday, and the next year it'll be a Saturday. And so it's a big mess. And so the genius of this 7-day cycle built into the Bible and absorbed throughout Western civilization from where it's spread everywhere else is this idea of a 6-day push and a 7-day pullback. And that seventh day pullback is terminated with the havdala service that you were talking about. And there's several features about it, but there's only time to look at one right now, which is that it's made over a beverage, a cup of usually wine or grape juice or something similar, and it's we make sure that it overflows. And the idea is that that represents the money I'm going to create during this week. And the overflow is that I'm not going to make only enough for what I think I need. I'm going to keep going beyond that. And this is the idea is a lot like in unarmed combat. Most human beings have a natural reluctance to hit somebody in the face. And so when you're in a situation where you need to, you're usually not going to be very effective because you usually pull your punch involuntarily. You are not striking the opponent's nose as fast and as hard as you should be doing so because there's a part of you that's reluctant. And so one of the techniques that trainers use is they say you must visualize that your fist has to reach the back of his skull, right through his face, not the front. And that way, by the time you start pulling your punch, you've inflicted maximum damage. In the same way, we want to make sure that we are directing our effort both quantitatively and qualitatively most effectively during the week. And so that's what the service has a lot to do with, because one of the things I want to make absolutely clear, and people get very uncomfortable when I start off lectures sometimes by saying speeches, who wants to make a lot of money, a lot more than you're making? So people get really uncomfortable. They avert their eyes. They don't want to look at me because of this conditioning that making money is bad. And when I say, well, I'm going to be speaking about making more money, a lot of people say, well, you mean like having harmony and peace in your life? No, speak to your therapist about that. I'm speaking about making more money. Now, getting out of debt is very important. You've got to learn to do that. And my friend Dave Ramsey is the best guide for that. Investing money is very important, but you've got to have a nest egg in order to do that. I'm talking about increasing revenue. That's what we're talking about. That's what this book is all about. And that's what I teach. That's the focus. And people need a lot of adjustment just to feel comfortable with that statement.
And that's why we start off with commandment number 1 that gets you in the right mindset to take on the rest of the book. And Rabbi Lapin, I know your time is valuable, and I know we've already taken a lot of it. So they really the listeners need to grab this book, and they need to go through the other 8 commandments. They need to dig deeper into commandment number 1 and 4 that we briefly touched on. But while we've got you here, and before I let you go, there's a few questions that I just want to rapid fire ask.
With pleasure. Absolutely. Fire away.
Wonderful. So how about a book on your Kindle or currently on your bedside table? If I were going to school today, I'd probably be diagnosed as triple ADD. But fortunately, I wasn't. And so fortunately, when I was going to school, nobody put drugs in me. I like to think that many of my teachers were driven to drugs, but not me. So I don't read one book at a time. I'm reading 3 books right now. Do you want me to tell you what they are? If you don't mind, we'd love to hear them.
No, I don't mind at all. I'm reading Thomas Sowell, who is a stupendously, fantastically readable economist at Stanford, at the Hoover Institution. Thomas Sowell's book, Wealth, Poverty, and Politics, I'm reading. Then Great Britain's representative at the European Parliament in Brussels is a phenomenal writer called Daniel Hannan, and his book is called Inventing Freedom. And so I'm halfway through that. I'm more than halfway through the Sowell book and Daniel Hannan's Inventing Freedom. And then there's a British doctor called Theodore Dalrymple, and there's a wonderful book of his I'm about a quarter of the way through. It's called Life at the Bottom, The World View That Makes the Underclass. So those are the 3 books I'll be finishing, I hope, by the end of the week or early next week.
Wow, and all 3 of them are first-time recommended. So how about best movie ever made?
Oh, I wish you wouldn't have asked me that. I'm such a Philistine. I'm such an idiot when it comes to movies. I suppose I'm supposed to say Casablanca or something, but it's not that one. It's the best. Basically, you're asking me what movie I like, right? What's my favorite movie, please? What's it called? No. Oh, don't be silly, Susan. Stop it. Come on.
The Lion one?
No, my favorite.
The Blues Brothers.
The Blues Brothers. Susan knew I'm on an important interview, so she said Gone with the Wind because she thought I must sound a little more cultured. But it's not. It's the Blues Brothers. Okay. I call it Aretha Franklin's finest performance.
That is so fun. I'm so glad we did that. How about your leadership superpower?
Oh, that would be speech. The most important thing, yes. The first inkling you have of anybody's leadership power is their fluency and their ability to articulate. That's. I mean, even if it's the Marine, it's the Marine guy who's training you in basic training. The first thing you know about him is his voice. And so I'd say, if somebody wants to study leadership, so probably start off first of all with vocal discipline.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. Actually, when you started talking about the Marine drill sergeant, it reminded me of last month's book on the shelf, which is Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last, which was originally inspired by a Marine drill sergeant and the way the drill sergeant handles the new recruits, and then also the way that they handle when they go about mealtime. So very good transition from last month's book to this month's book. Well, Rabbi Lapin, I really appreciate the time today. You are just a hoot to hang out with, and really love to learn about your movie and your book. And to really dive into this book, I think you did a tremendous job of distilling down some of these things that have been taught through your lifetime and through the lifetime of many, many people through history over 3,000 years. And now we can see them and apply them into our lives. And so I can't thank you enough for your time today with us.
No, you're welcome. And it's a great pleasure. And you're exactly right, because, Donald Trump could teach people how to make money, but that's only people who inherited quite a large fortune from their father. This is the experience of millions of very ordinary Jews, smart ones, not so smart ones, black ones, white ones, men, women, and all of them just using these principles of ancient Jewish wisdom have thrived, and so can everybody else.
Wonderful. Now, Rabbi Lapin, how can we get in touch with you or find out more about the book?
Well, the book is called Thou Shalt Prosper, and obviously many people have ongoing relationships with online booksellers like Amazon. But if you'd like to get it from my website, you'd be more than welcome to do that. And my website is rabbidaniellapin.com.
Well, we will link that up in the show notes, and I highly recommend your book. I think it's a great read. You challenged me to read it this week. I have spent at least 2 hours a day in the pages of Thou Shalt Prosper, and really appreciate the time that I've had with you today.
Well, I'm delighted, and it was a real pleasure talking with you, and I very much hope that our paths cross in person so we can actually sit down and break bread together and share some more leisure time. Thanks so much. God bless.
A big thank you to Rabbi Daniel Lapin for coming on the Modern Leadership Podcast and delivering so much background into what it took to write this book, Thou Shalt Prosper. What a really cool story. And what I really love about this is this episode is going live the first episode of the month, which means we will be diving deeper into this book over the next couple of episodes. There really is so much to talk about in this book. We just couldn't cover it all today. We tried to do our best. We talked about 2 of the 10 commandments. And my biggest takeaways from today, our chat with Rabbi Lapin. Commandment number 1, you got to believe in the dignity and the morality of business. It's that mindset. You have to shift that mindset so that you don't put up an artificial barrier to yourself. Now, remember that as he wrote this book, it wasn't so much about becoming rich as it was becoming your best self. In fact, from the book, it's not about becoming rich. It's about adding value to yourself, your family, and the world around you. And we talked about some of the lessons that he learned through his practice as a rabbi and how he applied them to his lives, and not just how he applied them, but how we can apply them. And then, of course, the 4th commandment, my favorite, do not pursue perfection. We've talked about that a lot on the podcast, but we got into this story about the havdala service. And if you can imagine this, you have this saucer and you have this teacup. And then, as Rabbi Lapin talked about, you have this liquid, whether it's wine or grape juice or whatever. And as you pour as part of this service, as part of this ceremony, you pour until the cup is full and then overfilling. And it's a visual representation, a mental example, kind of a metaphor for our lives, that as we work, as we earn, as we do things in life, we want to fill our cup, but we don't just want to stop there. Once our cup is full, we allow it to overfull so that there's more to go around. There's more to share. We can work in charities and we can help other people. There's just so much that we can do that we continue to work and work hard. So I do have a treat for you. If you go over to jkcarlson.com/ML14 for Modern Leadership 14, that is the show notes page for this episode. And if you click on the book club link, you will get my complete review and summary of Rabbi Lapin's book, Thou Shalt Prosper. So I went through, it's about 355 pages. I took notes and I distilled it down to my biggest takeaways. And you can get those. It's free. Again, that link, jkcarlson.com/ML14, ML14. Next week, we will be back with an all-new episode on influence. We're going to talk about things that we can do to influence the way other people see us. We're going to talk about some steps and things that we can do within our lives. I think you're going to love it. But until then, I want to wish you a great day, an even better life. Thou shalt prosper and stay awesome. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.